Thank you all for joining us today for 5 ways to build better board meeting agendas. Welcome to everyone, no matter whether it's morning, noon, or night for you. We're glad that you're with us today. So we'll go ahead and get started here. So my name is Margot Alquist, and I am the Senior Content Marketing Manager here at Govenda. And we will be talking to, or she will be talking to us rather, Debbie Peveril, who we're thrilled to have here, who is a very distinguished speaker and author and chartered accountant as well. So we'll be talking to her, and she has lots of good information about board agendas and meetings and really getting the most out of the agendas and the meetings. All right. Just a little bit of Zoom housekeeping before we get going. If you have a question while Debbie's presenting, no problem. We're actually going to be taking questions during the presentation. So please just raise your hand using Zoom, or you can actually put your question into the Q&A box or the chat, and we'll go ahead and address questions as you have them. All of you are automatically on mute. And of course, you have the choice to put your video on or off. But just a quick reminder, if you do have questions, we will be taking them during the presentation. All right. So just a little bit about Govenda before we get started. We have a great array of customers, as you can see by these logos on the screen. We're very grateful to have these customers. We have customers who are in nonprofits, in bigger businesses, publicly traded companies. It really ranges from who we have. And we've got 44,000 users across the globe, very high customer renewal rates that we're very proud of, and an excellent NPS score that our customers have given us. And a little bit more about what we do. We're all about helping boards of all kinds really reach their full potential and get to their strategic goals. And we do that by giving them time-saving capabilities, ways to better handle committee work and committee management, in-app collaboration. So in a secure environment with all your documents, you can chat and annotate documents and collaborate. And then, of course, this is one that Govenda's been on the forefront of, AI, and using AI to do more administrative work and to help everyone work smarter. All right, so more about our wonderful guest. So Debbie is an experienced speaker. She's been facilitating workshops and speaking since 1986. She is widely known for her sense of humor and her depth of financial knowledge, as well as governance knowledge. Debbie holds a chartered accountant designation from the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants. She spent 10 years working as a CA with national accounting firms before founding her own firm in 1988. Peveril & Associates continues on the operation, providing all services of public accounting practice. In 1998, Debbie founded SBR Communications to separate the growing volume of training business from her accounting practice. And in 2008, Painless Financial Training Group, Inc. was created. This corporation publishes her books, as you can see here. And Debbie has written an array of books that she uses in her courses and as well sells. Some of these titles include 10 Tax Traps to Avoid, Basic Board Governance, Budgeting Essentials, Starting a Successful Business, and as you can see here, New to a Board, Now What, and the Effective Meeting series, Chair an Effective Meeting, Take Minutes Effectively, and as we're going to discuss more today, Craft an Effective Agenda. All right, so with all of that said, I'm now going to hand it over to Debbie, and she will go ahead and share all this wonderful information about how to make the most of your meetings and make better agendas.
Thank you, Margot. We'll get this started. hopefully. I am oh, here we go. I'm looking at yours instead of mine. Here we go. All right. So thanks, Margot, for the introduction. My definition of an effective agenda is one that leads to an effective meeting, of course, which means that you need to define what an effective meeting is. So my definition of that is that you've achieved the goal of the meeting, which of course presumes that you have a goal of the meeting, and you've done that in a reasonable amount of time without too much drama or stress. So how are we going to do that? Well, first off, there should be a purpose to a meeting. So your agenda, of course, has a purpose as well. You've probably all been at that meeting that should have been an email or a phone call, or maybe not happened at all. We want to make sure that if we're calling a meeting, we're calling it for the purposes that a meeting is used for. And I have identified several of these, so to separate the meeting from the email thread or the Google Doc. First off, you need to be making a decision, and it's easier to do that if you're talking back and forth in a more time-effective method than by sending email threads and responding to them. So I think a meeting is useful for that. When you need to understand material and people want to have an opportunity to discuss it among themselves, to discuss it perhaps with a trainer or the person who's presenting it, I think that's a valid reason for a meeting. And thirdly, if you need to keep a group identity maintained. So that means like a board, for example, one of the things they do that identifies them as a board is they have board meetings. It would be important for them to schedule meetings to take care of some of the things that they and only they can do. So when we look at what an agenda is, it should be a list of the topics that are going to be discussed at the meeting in the order in which they'll be dealt with. And I'll mention in a little bit that I like to see timings on an agenda. What time is the meeting going to start? How long is each one of these topics going to take? When will it be over? And the crafting of an agenda is important when you put the timings in for a couple of reasons. If you're inviting guests, then they know when to show up. If you see that a topic is going to take so long to discuss that your meeting is going to run long, then maybe you need to change either the length of the meeting, hopefully not, or figure out that you need to break it up into more than one meeting. So on this agenda, I think it should be clear to everybody why the meeting's been called and why they're there. What is the purpose of this meeting? In many cases, I am hoping that it's going to tie into your strategic plan, that the meeting you're having now is to deal with the things that you said you were going to do that you're now doing. And everybody sees that the agenda is about the stuff you agreed to on the strategic plan. I think having a standard agenda format is also important. There's a couple of reasons for this. One of them is so people know where to look on the agenda to figure out what's going on. Second one is to try to save a little time. You don't want to reinvent the wheel every time. And some things legally have to happen. You can't start a meeting without the call to order. We typically approve the agenda and then last meeting's minutes. Those things are kind of set out by Robert's rules. And then the question comes up, how do you want to organize the agenda after that? And yeah, I'm going to come back to that again. But, here's an example of a good agenda, I think. And the second last thing here you see is the meeting evaluation. Good meetings will be evaluated. Was this a good meeting? How was it a good meeting? What could we have done to make it better? And then, of course, you have adjournment. So whose job is it to create this agenda? Well, it depends on the kind of meeting you're having. And, the book that I wrote about agendas wasn't just for board meetings. So there's other meetings in your lives. I'm sure we've all been in meetings we wish we didn't have to be at and wondered how we're wasting our time. So with a board meeting, typically the chair will oversee the creation of the agenda. That is by policy. All of these decisions should be set out by policy, not just habits. We should know what the organization really wants to have done. So the chair responsible for the board meeting agenda. If it's not a board meeting, is it a committee? Then the committee chair would be responsible for that. If you're just calling a meeting to figure something out, I had a meeting yesterday at my office because we hired a new person. So we had a getting to know the new person meeting. That was the goal. The agenda was to cover the things that person needed to do and to assign those tasks. That was called by me because I'm the boss. Sometimes, of course, the boss calls a meeting And you don't get to decide if this is going to be an effective meeting with all the proper things being done because, you know, the boss is the boss. That was the first one. The second one is, again, that the agenda is part of the bigger process of how you run your organization. As I've mentioned, it is part of the strategic plan, hopefully, and you know why we're having this meeting. So the timing again, I know I said that already. You want to have times on the agenda. And part of the people reviewing the agenda, which they should get ahead of time, is for them to look and see, are there things on this agenda that are going to take a long time to talk about? And why are they going to take a long time to talk about? Like, is there a way to shorten that process up? Or you see something on the agenda that has been allocated an amount of time and you don't think that's a reasonable amount of time for that to be allocated. I attend many AGMs as the auditor of the organization. I attend many board meetings as the auditor. And I can tell you people do not usually give me a whole lot of time on the agenda to talk about things. But we've got a question about, on average, how long are your meetings? And of course, the standard answer to that always is depends. You know, typically, I'll say this later, if you're having Zoom meetings, I think they should be shorter, but they can be more frequent because they don't involve travel. If you're having, say, quarterly board meetings, then sometimes those are full day events because people are coming from various locations and they're not coming, you know, to our meeting, and they're only having the meetings quarterly. So I would say that there is a correlation. Sorry, I'm going back here. Correlation between the amount of meetings you have and how long they are. So does it make sense to you to have weekly meetings that are only 45 minutes long, monthly meetings that are a couple hours long, quarterly meetings that are a day long? And again, you know, I can get really into this. Is the board just doing board business if you're talking about a board meeting? Or are they doing operational stuff, which should be being done by management? Are they doing committee work at the board level? You know, we're trying for an effective use of the board members' times. So the longer the meetings are, sometimes you lose energy, but if they're going to be long, they shouldn't be frequent as well. So take a look at how long you think each item is going to take to talk about. That is circulated, and people can decide if they agree on, you know, that enough time has been allocated for that. There's there's a craft to ordering the agenda. I mean, there's certain standard things that go in certain places, but, you know, maybe you want to put your similar content together. And I see this with the financial stuff. Like, let's look at the current financial information. Let's look at the budget. Let's look at the audit, all within the same part of the agenda. I can make jokes sometimes about how you don't want to have to go back and explain things twice. So if you explain it once during the time period you're talking about financial stuff, then it doesn't come up an hour or so later again, causing another explanation to have to take place. So that can be efficient to have everything, you know, things grouped together. I have debates all the time about contentious issues. Should we have them early in the agenda when people are just getting there, you know, have more energy? Or is a contentious issue going to lead to someone jumping up from the table and saying, I give up, you people are hopeless, and we lose quorum? So maybe you want to have contentious issues towards the end. And I hope, I mean, another whole book about how chairs control the behavior of people at a meeting, but we hope that we're only talking about issues, that we're not getting into talking about personalities or anybody's IQ, that we're having respectful meetings where everybody is happy to share their point of view. Pacing, you know, sometimes you want to have a big block of something like the financial stuff and then maybe something lighter after that. So it's kind of like how you used to do when we had record albums, slow song, fast song. You will find the things that work best for your group when you start thinking about it. Okay, I'm seeing everyone talking about the length of time. I'm not responding to that, so we're good. All right, so who is invited to your meeting? And, you know, this can lead to the meeting either being fast or slow. A member who is an ex officio member means that they have this position on your board or your committee because of another job that they hold. So, you know, maybe you've got a tourism board and the mayor of the towns are always ex officio members. So they need to be invited. Okay. And are they there for the whole meeting? So again, are they allowed to vote? Maybe, maybe not. Are they allowed to contribute? We have a funding agency in my area which is refusing to be called ex officio now. Now they are observers because they don't vote, they don't talk, they just watch. I'm not sure that's helpful, but the funders get to make the rules. So which guests are invested? Do you need to hear from subject matter experts? Do you need to hear from lawyers, accountants, HR people, whatever issues are involved? And they should only be coming and going at the time when they're, need to be there. They shouldn't be there for the whole meeting. Committee chairs, are they board members? If so, then they can be there for the whole meeting. Are they not board members? So they would only come in and present their committee report, answer questions, and then leave. Right. So we need to determine who are the meeting attendees, because these are the people who need to know when the meeting is. They need to know what the agenda is. That kind of thing needs to be sorted out with them. And somewhere in this presentation, I will mention that sometimes you just need to uninvite people. If you have people who are coming to meetings, but they're not helpful in what they do, and you don't have to have them there because they're not the boss, then, we should think about what policies we have about having someone removed from being invited to a meeting because they're not contributing. But I have a slide on that later. So draft agenda has to go out, I think, at least a week before the meeting. And some of this obviously depends on what you're doing. But if you can give people a list of the topics that far ahead, then somebody can decide if they have an option, whether they're coming to that meeting. They may feel like there's nothing they bring to that particular collection of topics. And, I have a personal rule, and have had for a long time. I don't go to a meeting unless there's an agenda, because I don't know if it's wasting my time. You only have so much time left. I charge by the hour. So I want to know why I'm invited to a meeting, what we're going to talk about. And, hopefully if it's something formal, then there's a formal agenda. So board members, in this case, they look at the list of what's on the agenda and they can make a decision about that. One of the things I run into is conflict of interest. Is something being discussed at the board meeting where a board member has a potential conflict? The board member has to let the chair know that fairly quickly, because you don't want to have confidential information a board member's in conflict with going out with the board package. So I'm envisioning two things here. You've got the agenda that goes out. People go, yes, 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 I have no conflicts with this. I agree. This is good stuff to talk about. And then maybe there's a board package sent out. And a different board package might be sent out to somebody who is going to be asked to recuse themselves for part of a meeting because they're in conflict. We should, of course, read any reports ahead of time. And again, this is a chair thing. If you let people read stuff at the boardroom table, then everybody will come to the meeting having not read the reports, because why would they read it ahead of time when someone's going to be given time at the meeting to read it? So that's a policy thing again. And how do we train our board members to follow these policies? A person can decide whether they're going to attend, and we would hopefully, and I'm sure we do, have policies about whether if somebody misses, a few meetings, whether they're going to be asked to leave the board. We have a number, hopefully, policies around that. So a board member isn't going to just decide they're not coming to a board meeting unless they can't come. We hope they're committed enough to the cause that they're attending if they're able to attend. And, we have to let the chair know, because one of the reasons we need to know is, are we still going to have a quorum? If we hear from a number of people that they're not going to make the meeting, then the meeting may not be able to be held, and we have to scramble around and pick another time. So what revisions happen to the draft agenda? Do you have a conflict? Do you want to add or subtract time from an agenda item? Do you want to remove an agenda item from the agenda? And I do this or see this done if it looks like a board is going to start talking about matters that are actually operational. We have management for that. Or somebody wants to talk about things that don't fit into our strategic plan or aren't within our mandate. Those items should not be should not be on the agenda. And you'll get that feedback when you circulate that ahead of time. And along these lines, I'm not a huge fan of people showing up at the meeting asking to have things added to the agenda. They've had time to look at the agenda ahead of time. If they want stuff added, they should have added it back then. Why are you coming to the meeting with something that you want to add to the agenda? It screws up the timing. An effective meeting starts on time and ends on time. If we can't end on time because we added things to the agenda, well, that has an impact on how effective the meeting was. So by policy, I would say that you have exceptions to that rule. If somebody comes to the meeting with something that is both urgent and an emergency, it has to be decided like right now, and it just happened. Don't let people who had items they wanted on the agenda that didn't get put on the agenda come and try to add that at the time of the meeting. We want the agenda to be more or less secure. So we also want to make sure that people show up. We want it organized, and everybody should know what they're doing in order to attend the meeting. So how do we schedule the meeting? And various people have various plans for this, but some groups have, we meet the second Tuesday of every month, and people who are on that board will set that time, hopefully in their calendars, in perpetuity, that they are the second Tuesday of every month, they have a board meeting. But this causes trouble if there's something that happens in your life that always happens on Tuesday and you want to be on this board, but you're never going to be able to make a meeting. And then people are into this, well, we've always been on Tuesdays, but maybe we need to start meeting on Mondays or Sundays or something. If you've got a standing meeting time, you would hope that people would schedule their lives around the meeting if they're interested in the cause. So non-standard meeting time schedules are also possible. Some groups don't meet every month. Could they meet the second Tuesday of every second month? They could. Or they could use one of those doodle polls or some other of the technologies that are around to find times where everybody could meet, but set it up like months ahead of time. I think that if somebody calls me and they want me to come to a board meeting and it's next week and they didn't decide the board meeting was next week and it's not an emergency, then I'm not sure what, I'd like them to be a little more organized than that. So when you have irregular meetings, it's more work for somebody who is on the board to figure out how to get that, more or less into their schedule. We all know how to say, every Tuesday for the rest of our lives. So figure it out. And again, this is a policy. Do you have a standard time? Do you have a non-standard time? And how do you decide if you're not going to have a standard time when the meetings are going to take place? In all cases, we need to have a policy around sending regrets. So I have lost hours of my life to debating whether somebody had sent regrets or they were just absent, and trying to explain to people why there's a difference. So when you send your regrets, you do it hopefully a week ahead of time, and people know you're not coming. So if there's no quorum without you, they have canceled the meeting. People who did not send regrets but do not show up are absent. And unless they had, a personal tragedy a couple of hours before that meeting, we sometimes consider those people to be inconsiderate, that they didn't tell everyone they weren't going to be there, so people couldn't make other plans. And you go to have the meeting, they're not there, maybe the meeting can't be held. And, if there's a good excuse, then maybe that reputation can be repaired. But if there isn't, then, that's not the ideal board member, somebody who forgets to come to a meeting. And I have the same kind of whining to do about people who are late. I've been at a few meetings over the years where we're breaking up the meeting because we don't have quorum and somebody shows up. They're half an hour late and now we have quorum. So, in your mind, you've already decided, well, this isn't happening, and now you can have it. And, this person maybe is also not considerate unless there's some good reason why they're not there. So the timing, this was something I talked about at the start, and, it's one that keeps coming up. Do we have a fixed duration for the meeting? I have chaired a group where our deal was it had to be an hour long. Anything that was longer than an hour got put off to the next meeting. But we met every third week, and it wasn't that crazy busy. I find that on Zoom, I think 2 hours is pretty much a maximum for board meetings on Zoom. That's a long time for people to be interacting with the technology the way that we're doing now, of course. So, you're going to decide. And again, I have a whole list of meeting policies. Do you think that having a fixed duration would be helpful for people? If you're doing meetings during the day, I think this is very important. Particularly if we're talking about a meeting that happens at work. If the Monday morning department head meeting happens at 8:30 and has to be over by 9:30 because everybody's got to get to class, well, that makes sense, right? You can't have a meeting that goes longer than that because people have made other commitments. When we have board members, who have a life where maybe they've got children to move here and there, or, they have other things they have to do. If you can tell people how long the meeting is going to be, then that helps them organize their life. And again, when I'm scoring a meeting, I want it to have taken the amount of time we said it was going to take. And you get better at that when you practice. When you put the times on the agenda and you see how long it does take to talk about things, then you can adjust. And then things will probably be a little more accurate. You also need a policy on how much notice should be given about giving regrets. If someone is going to give regrets, does it have to be received within a couple of days of the meeting? And, not everything can be made perfect by a policy. If somebody is sick and they only became sick during the day, well, then it's hard for them to give you a week's notice that they're sick. So, again, all policies are going to have exceptions, but it should be, when we talk about board training, people should know that if they're not coming to a meeting, it's important to let people know as soon as possible, particularly if you're dealing with volunteers. That makes it, more challenging. So quorum, of course, quorum is a real thing. What's the quorum for your meetings? A typical quorum is half of the board plus one. So a 10-member board, you need 6 people, which, sounds simple, but they, and I think that's reasonable. If you're making decisions, you should at least have 6 of the 10 people there. We need to, if you've adjusted the number of board members, then of course quorum gets adjusted as well. And, people should understand how important quorum is. When we're meeting virtually, there's a whole bunch of things I think that can be different. One of them would be that we want to have on the agenda that is sent out to the board members, the actual login information should be reproduced on the written agenda that's emailed or whatever. So you're not looking for 2 things. You're not looking for the agenda. You're not looking for the Zoom invite. It's all in one document. If we're going to meet on Zoom, or I guess there's other platforms, Teams, I guess, then you won't have long meetings. You probably have them shorter, more frequent. There's some good things about Zoom besides avoiding the travel. I'm a fan of being able to use the polling feature in Zoom to do voting. So the chair or whoever has set up the Zoom, they're going to be able to, put any resolutions that we know are going to be made, like accepting the reports or the decisions that need to be made, can be put ahead of time in a poll. Then the poll is brought up, people can vote, and you've got an easy way of documenting that. It's also, we divulge into voting here. If you're dealing with contentious issues, then, if you're trying to, if you're voting in person, you can do all in favor, signify by saying aye, but then everybody sees who's saying aye. You could switch this to a secret ballot, like the way we vote in elections, where people can do their vote without everybody knowing what their vote was. So unless it's unanimous, nobody really knows. The polling does that for you already without having to sort that out. Virtual meetings, another thing that I'm not a fan of, and again, I have many pet peeves, is if you're having a meeting and you've got a couple of board members who are in one room and board members who are calling in from away. When we do Zoom meetings at my office, everybody goes to their own office and gets on Zoom. We don't have a couple of people in the conference room and our employee who's in Montreal being the only one who comes in on Zoom. Everybody's on Zoom. when we do that. And that way, the meeting experience is the same for everyone. If you've been in a situation where you've got people in the room and people who are not in the room, it's pretty easy to ignore the people who aren't in the room. And, they don't hear as well. What I find, it's not obvious sometimes what they're saying. So if you can organize that, that's not always possible. If you're having a board meeting and somebody is just coming in from Florida because they're there for the winter, then you're not going to send everybody home to be on Zoom so that it'll be the same. But it's something to think about. If you can organize it so that everybody's having the same meeting experience, then that's, I think, helpful. Policies. So I've talked a fair bit already about policies that, you're going to want to have policies around how often your meetings are, who's invited. You've, of course, got things like Robert's Rules of Order, which govern how you're actually going to conduct the meeting, what people are allowed to do, what people aren't allowed to do. As far as agendas go, I think that every meeting should have one policy being reviewed at the meeting, that should be a standard agenda item. And one of the reasons I suggest that is because if you ever call a meeting that you're just going to go over all your policies and that's all you're doing at this meeting, people will leave the country to get away from that meeting. I mean, this is not the meeting anybody wants to go to, where they're going to spend the whole time talking about policies. So we have that. The other thing is boards need to understand that policy is what they do, and they should understand that at every meeting. So if you're going to review all of your policies within a 3-year cycle, we take them, we divide them into 36 if you're having monthly meetings, and we figure out when we're going to review each one of these policies. You can do it more frequently or more policies if you have stuff that comes up, but I think that it should be something that is always done at a meeting because the board is always thinking about policies, and policies are important. I go on about this stuff too, because we do have situations where a group has a lot of policies, but they're not following all of them. So you have the policies that exist and you have the policies that are being followed, and you have things that are being done that aren't governed by policy. And all of this would be better to be sorted out. So if you set aside some time at every meeting, then hopefully you're going to have policies in place that people are actually following. There could also be a policy committee, and maybe there is, and that committee has a standing report where they come up and review policy with the board, every single meeting. Meetings that are special, like your AGM, what happens at the AGM, of course, is the new board is going to be elected. And this is the time when members or shareholders have something to say. They are going to elect the new board. They're going to approve the financial statements and elect the auditor. This is the last time that they get to talk, because after that, the board meets and the board does the work that they were given to do by the members or the shareholders. Okay. So typical AGM agendas, there's a call to order. You have to approve the agenda and review and approve last year's AGM minutes. Those are pretty standard. How much reports you do depends. I attend some very small board meetings which turn into the AGM. The board reviews the financials, approves the financials, they cancel or they adjourn that meeting, and then they call the AGM because they're not getting anybody else to come to the AGM. It's just usually the board members. So when you've got that, it's pretty low key. But as some of you would know, some AGMs attract a lot of people. Sometimes there's food and people talking and, interesting things going on. So how many reports you want to do, again, would be something by policy. The annual financial statements typically get approved at the AGM. Is there an auditor or is there a professional accountant that's involved in the preparation? I'm Canadian. So, we have a requirement only that auditors are appointed if the shareholders agree. Basically, if there's only a few shareholders. Public companies, of course, have to be audited. Then we've got the board nominations and the board's elected. It is possible for someone to come to an AGM and become a board member. They could be elected from the floor. This is the more interesting AGMs where there's a coup. The nomination committee came up with a slate of directors and somebody else comes up with some more directors and maybe different people get elected. Most AGMs are not that interesting, but those ones are kind of fun. So then they announce the directors, there's an adjournment. The meetings have to be handled this way. The agenda here, of course, is important, as are the minutes. I have another book on minutes, how things have to be reported correctly in the minutes in order for people to know what was decided. Minutes are very legal kind of documents. Anything else that might happen at an AGM? So the supermajority here, that would be 75% rather than a straight 50%. You usually need a supermajority to approve bylaw changes. So when you have the boards recommending some bylaw changes, then those items have to be approved by 75% of the shareholders or of the members. So that is a little out of the ordinary thing at the AGM, but that's the only time you can do it. So when we look at, the whole governance structure, the law under which the organization was created is the big deal. You can't do anything that's against that law. Nothing you can do with a bylaw or a board policy or a procedure can change what's in a legal act. So it's the main thing. And some of the bylaws, how many directors there's going to be, that type of thing can't be decided by the directors either. They can only be decided by the members or shareholders, and only when they have 75% majority. The fourth thing, making sure we handle confidentiality and conflict of interest. I talked a bit already about conflict of interest because it is important in that we don't want to be giving information to somebody who's in conflict. So people need to look at that agenda being circulated as soon as they possibly can to identify conflicts so they don't get the information they shouldn't be getting. So does this group have confidential items? And maybe they don't. Some of the groups that I deal with, they could publish the minutes of their meetings on the website. It doesn't matter. They don't talk about anything that is confidential most of the time. Sometimes you got hiring decisions or legal decisions, but in general, they're not dealing with a bunch of confidential items. So if you do, however, then how do we get the agenda out without there being any problems with somebody seeing that information that shouldn't? There's a lot of ways that can be done. If you are going to send things electronically by email, then it should only go to emails that are the board members' emails. I have some clients who share an email with their spouse. That, of course, you can't send an email to that address. You shouldn't be sending an email to a place where other people could retrieve that email, assuming you got confidential stuff, right? So we would do this with a board-only part of the website or encrypted emails. The board-only part's a little easier to manage. I have some groups who have given their board members iPads, and the iPads have obviously an email address on it. They're only to use the iPad for board business. They bring the iPad to the meeting. They can't print anything from that iPad, so they don't have to worry about confidential items being on paper because they're only on the iPad. How we dispose of meeting information, the board package and the agendas. If there's confidential information involved, we need to be training board members that they don't have their own filing system at home. They're not keeping all of this confidential stuff somewhere in their house, unless, of course, it's in a locked filing cabinet, in a locked office, in a locked house, and maybe they have a moat around it. So we don't have any worries about somebody getting a hold of that information that they shouldn't. So the training's important. When I talk about confidentiality, I often have a graphic I use. There's a padlock on the head of a person. Because what I have found most often is we've got great controls. Everything has to be shredded. We've got firewalls. We have all kinds of encryption, and we're taking care of all this stuff. And then a board member goes home and tells his wife everything that happened at the meeting, or his friends. So all of the technology in the world isn't going to help us if we haven't trained people to understand that if something's confidential, they can't tell anybody but the people who are already on the board. So anything on the agenda that's confidential should be clearly marked as being confidential. And again, what policy do you have? How do you establish that something's confidential? Because when it is confidential, it has to be handled differently than regular, nobody cares if you tell the world stuff. Privacy officer is a common thing in places where I hang out. And, this means that there's a person in management who has been made responsible for all the privacy policies, monitoring compliance with the privacy policies, determining if a privacy policy has been breached and what consequences should be in place. We have legislation in Canada requiring that if a business carries on commercial activities, that they have a privacy officer. That is a rule. Conflict of interest, again, customize the agenda, customize the board package. And this just keeps on happening. If somebody's in conflict with a decision and more information about this decision is going to be at the next board meeting, then we have to deal with that agenda as well. This can get quite carried away if we've got a number of different board meetings or board members who have different conflicts with anything. It can be kind of a lot of work for somebody to figure out who's going to get what in the board package. Excuse me. In camera. So I have a couple of things to say about this. First of all, I'm saying use sparingly. You shouldn't be having all of your meetings in camera because that will make people wonder if you understand what in camera is about. Typically, we go in camera when we're talking about legal things that we don't want in the minutes that could be part of a lawsuit, or when we're talking about evaluating employees. So I have suggested that there is a portion of the agenda, usually at the end, where the board will ask themselves, do we need to go in camera? So it's on the agenda. The board can decide if this week, this month, whatever, we need to be in camera. I like to see it on the board agenda all the time, because when you do, if you don't have it there all the time, when you do put it on, it creates a lot of stress for management and staff. They're wondering, why is the board having an in-camera session? Because they're not invited to an in-camera session. It's just the board members. So typically, you would do board evaluation of your employees. You go in camera to do it. You come out of that meeting and, there's a resolution about staff retention or wages, that kind of thing. You don't explain all the rationale because while you're in camera, you did that. You come out of camera and announce the results. I don't think it's the same as an executive session, actually, Doretta. I would say an executive session is just the president, vice president, secretary, treasurer, just that whoever's on the executive committee. Now, maybe in your group, it's used the same. The in-camera means that it's only board members, no invited guests, unless it's a lawyer. Well, yeah, let's just say no invited guests, no employees. And it allows people to speak more freely because they don't have management or employees there. So I, would put it on the agenda, and management leaves and board looks at each other and says, we have anything to talk about? They say no, and they adjourn the meeting. But it always happens that way. No drama when you do want to use it. I did mention a little earlier that, how do you get people off the team? And this can be a bigger thing than just getting somebody away from a meeting. When I talk about how to chair a meeting, there should be a provision for having people removed from a meeting if they are not following the meeting rules. This is so much easier to do on Zoom. You just kick them out with one click. In person, you might have to call security, which of course that's drama. We're trying to avoid drama. So let's just make it clear to people who are on this committee, board, whatever, that, they're there to help. And if they're not, doing the things they should do, they're not reading the information ahead of time, they're not having an open mind, they're disruptive and not following the rules, then, what does your policy say about getting rid of them? So the last thing is about really training the participants. And this, to me, this is very important, obviously. There's no point in having all these great policies about how to have great meetings, having your kick-ass strategic plan and all these great people, if people don't understand what to do when they get the agenda and the board package and how to behave at a meeting. So I would suggest that anybody who is invited to a meeting should be making sure that any of the, meetings that are mentioned, in the agenda are on your calendar. That would be the first thing that I would like to see happen, is that, you get invited to a meeting, is it already on your calendar? I have a group, well, I have all kinds of groups, but one of the things that this group does the best is at the end of every set of minutes, they have a list of the upcoming meetings, times and dates and locations, if that's important. They also have a list of action items that people, who is responsible for doing what between now and the next meeting. So if there are any action items that, you had from the last meeting, you want to make sure that you're ready to deal with that at the upcoming meeting. You got to take a look at that agenda promptly. And again, the chair's going to make this happen. If you've got people showing up at a meeting and they find out they've got a conflict of interest, but they never looked at the agenda, they never read the board package, probably either. But that, you want to have some consequences for not reviewing the agenda when you get that right off. I think that people should be considering what the decisions are going to be. Like, you look at, are we going to hire this cleaning company, for example? You look at the various proposals, you make up your mind. I think I like this one best. So you've kind of thought about it, but you come to the meeting ready to change your mind. I would like to know that some people at a meeting have decided to do something different than what they thought they were going to do, right? Would like to see that they were open to the other board members telling them something they hadn't thought of themselves. We see so much partisan, closed-minded stuff going on. I would like to believe that, if you're serving on a board, that you can change your mind and not feel like that's a failure, yes. Behaving yourself at meetings, that's important. Even if the group's not following Robert's Rules of Order, I think that every group should have at least one rule that says you're not allowed to interrupt another person, so that people can feel comfortable sharing their viewpoints. You have a board because you want the viewpoint of a bunch of people. Otherwise, you just have one person. People shouldn't, all the decisions shouldn't be unanimous. People should have a good discussion, and then a decision is made based on all of what they've heard. And, when I talk about issues, not personalities, one of the examples that I've used is, someone says, I think we should do this. And the other person says, you're a moron. That's the wrong thing. Okay, so we're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to call somebody a moron or an idiot or any of those bad words, because it doesn't matter whether they are in fact an idiot or a moron. It only matters that they have said something that you don't agree with. And now is the opportunity to have the conversation about what the right thing is to do. You've heard their viewpoint, you have your viewpoint, you hear some other people's viewpoints, and then the board makes a decision as a group. It's certainly possible to have meetings without drama and still not have 100% agreement to begin with. We, typically govern by consensus. So if you're, a board member, what's important about the agenda is, making sure, first of all, you're going to show up, making sure that you understand what's on the agenda, and coming to the meeting ready to talk about that. Okay. I think this is over to Margot. I didn't see the Q&A come up on my schedule. I only saw the chat. So if there are other questions, I can answer them. So
Yeah, feel free to put questions in the chat. Right now, I am just going to go through a couple of things. Debbie's talked about so many important ways to manage agendas and meetings, and the agenda in the meeting and invites and all that stuff. I do just want to share how, and you can see my screen, right, Debbie? Yeah. Okay, good. I just want to share how board management software can help in these processes, in some cases to expedite them. So when you're creating an agenda in a board management software platform like Govenda, Um, it really is taking some of that administrative time and maybe some of those more manual tasks. And it's just kind of helping you to get through some of that grunt work. It also gives you a lot more flexibility. So, for example, you can upload external files, PDFs, images, PowerPoint presentations, and all of that. You can also, and this is typically around a lot of different platforms now, including Govenda, you can drag and drop items into the agenda, which makes editing and changing things up very simple. So not that it's recommended that someone comes with revisions at the last moment, as Debbie said, everyone's got to review the materials. But if there is a change that needs to happen, you can make it very simply instead of, with paper. You can do it very, very easily here. And then you have the benefit of reusing the format of an agenda that's already existing in the system. So that is sort of how, with creating agendas, some of the benefits there. And then in terms of distributing the agendas, which is a very important part of what we talked about today, obviously, and sharing agendas, getting feedback, um, you can really better protect confidential information. Um, you can set permissions to a digital agenda on a board management software platform. There's even permissions about, who you can publish it to. You can really, do that however you need to. And then, of course, there's the benefit of everything on one secure platform that is really, there's a fortress around. Most of the board management software platforms, including Govenda, are SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3 certified, HIPAA compliant, battle tested. So really you've got that extra protection there. And then lastly, just, collecting the agenda feedback you can do it much quicker. You publish the agenda in the software platform and it can notify who needs, the recipients that the agenda's been published. You can chat in, the platform app with different people and collaborate on the agenda itself, and annotate the documents as you need. And then we have engagement monitoring. So if a certain couple people haven't responded or given their feedback, you can actually reach out to them individually and ask for that. So it's just another way to really make better agendas, get the work done, of course, while still following the wonderful guidelines that Debbie provided for us. So I also, just as we're almost finished here, want to let everyone know, we have monthly product demos. So if you want to learn more about Govenda specifically, please join us November 12th. That will be our next one. And then, we really appreciate everyone being with us today. So thank you. And we will take any questions. Also, one last thing, I'm just going to send a poll that everyone should see right now, just for some feedback. And maybe if you want more information from us, please answer the poll. It's published now and it should have popped up on all of your interface. And with that, any additional questions I see here, Doretta, how does the platform track issues that may be in committee process that needs to come back to the board at specific? So you can annotate. I encourage you. We can provide more information to you on that. But I can explain that basically you can get notifications, and there are different things in the platform. There's a need to work on section that is literally a checklist of what's not done. So if something's outstanding, you can see that and that publishes to your dashboard. And that will do that for the admin, as well as for members, board members, if they've got tasks that need to be published. So that's the basic gist of that. Um, anyone have any questions for Debbie about, all the wonderful agenda meeting, management information that we went through? All right. Oh, thank you. Yeah, that's great. Debbie, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I don't think. I mean, it's the sort of thing, the more time you spend on it, the better results you're gonna get. You know, if you plan a meeting better, if you plan your agenda better, then, hopefully you're gonna help achieve the goals the organization has set. So I think it's time well spent personally.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending. And we really appreciate it. And please join us next month or join our group demo. And if you have any other questions or anything, feel free to reach out. You can go to govenda.com for Govenda questions. And thank you again, Debbie. It was really a great session.
You're more than welcome. Thank
All
you.
right. Thanks. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. Bye.